Welcome to the Bible Chat Podcast, sponsored by the New Hampshire Bible Society. My name is Dave Denis, and I am the director of the New Hampshire Bible Society, as well as pastor of United Baptist Church in Concord, New Hampshire. So the mission of the New Hampshire Bible Society is to put the Bible into the hands and the heads and the hearts of the people of the state of New Hampshire, and we've been doing that since 1812. Today, we partner with churches and ministries all over New Hampshire to encourage Bible engagement and support churches of all kinds who want to use the Bible to fulfill their mission of bringing the good news of Jesus to all kinds of people and making disciples of Jesus wherever they are. So in this Bible Chat podcast, we'll be talking with Bible scholars and pastors and missionaries and gospel workers and lots of ordinary people about the Bible and what God is doing through his inspired written word. The Bible is a big, complex, and multifaceted book, so there's a lot to talk about. Now, unfortunately, the New Hampshire Bible Society can only offer Bible grants to churches and people in the state of New Hampshire. But that doesn't stop us from providing you, wherever you are, with great content that will help you appreciate and understand the Bible and approach it with more confidence, and then share the good news of Jesus that we find in the Bible with the people around you. So if you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe on whatever service you use to listen to podcasts. Leave us a review because that helps other people find us as well. And you can find us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. So today I would like to introduce you to two of my favorite Bible nerds, Malcolm Fowler and Abraham Gross. I'll let them introduce themselves in a minute. We recorded this way back in February of 2023, and it is one of the first recordings that I ever made for this podcast. You may be able to tell from the quality of the video and the audio. Now, I was just learning the podcasting ropes and kind of getting started. I have since learned to turn off the phones when I'm recording for a podcast, but at this point, well, you'll hear it. Please excuse that and listen closely to what Malcolm and Abe have to say. They've got some really good stuff going on in this conversation. Now, this is the kind of conversation that is really rich with big ideas and allusions to all kinds of biblical conversations, lots of good humor, and a few inside jokes. If anything these guys say raises questions in your mind, that's terrific. Let us know what you think by emailing us at the address in the show notes, and we'll see if we can answer your questions. So enough of that introductory stuff. Let's just get into the conversation. Hey, I'd like to welcome our guests, Malcolm Fowler, or the Reverend Malcolm Fowler, and the Reverend Abraham Gross to our the Bible chat today. Guys, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves a little bit about who you are, where you are, and your background.
All right. So, like Dave said, my name is Malcolm Fowler, and I'm currently serving as the pastor at Calvary Baptist Church in Springfield, Vermont. I have been the pastor there since 2016. My family and I moved up from Massachusetts, where I grew up and where I came to faith in the church that I grew up in, and pursued a call to pastoral ministry, and that has led me here.
And I'm part of the reason why he's here. My name's Abraham Gross. I'm the pastor of the Cavendish Baptist Church. I've been there since 2002. If you don't know Vermont geography, Cavendish is a town and a half from Springfield. But Malcolm and I went to college together. We shared a roommate, but not at the same time. So when I heard that Malcolm was looking for a church, I said, hey, there's a church nearby me that needs a pastor. You'd be a good fit. Why don't you come talk to them? And I think you actually candidated in my church, that people from Springfield came to hear Malcolm preach in my church, which was a wonderful thing. And God has brought you here, and we're very excited.
Nice. That's terrific. So, yeah, we're here talking about the Bible for the New Hampshire Bible Society, and the first question we always want to dive into the content with is it's just this. What is the Bible? What do you think the Bible is? Now, this can go a lots of different ways. Take it wherever you want to go. What is the Bible?
We were both Bible majors, so this is a good question.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can get this answered properly.
Yeah.
And the reason we ask this question is because people, I think, have a lot of misconceptions about what the Bible is, or limited conceptions. So let's see what we can do about expanding that.
Well, that's a really interesting thought about the misconceptions and limited conceptions. I mean, for me, the Bible was always sort of in my world because I grew up going to a church. I grew up, with a mom who brought me to Sunday school, and so I was sort of familiar with the Bible from a young age. But it was just this book that was in the pew, and I remember being very excited as a kid when I had memorized in first grade Sunday school. I had memorized my verses, and at the end of the year, I got presented with a Bible, which was really cool. And we're in my office right now, so you can tell I love books already, right? And so it was, to me, at the beginning, it was this book that was obviously important because I could see that it was important in areas of my life and to different people, but I still had confusion about it. I think for people who are familiar with what it is, we can still sometimes have some confusion to it. So I don't want to answer all of the technical questions of what it is, but just to say, as I became more familiar with it, it became more and more a part of my life. And so for me, what the Bible is it's cliche to say it's God's word, but it's that which instructs me in God's word. It's that which is passed down to me from generations, from those who have heard from God and have written that down and have compiled it and has been important for the faith that I'm connected to throughout the generations. It is, if you will, the rule of life for those who profess faith in Christ.
So I would answer it slightly differently because,
of course,
that's how I am.
Yeah.
Partly because I have a slightly different story than you, also going to church at a very young age, but also going to the synagogue at a relatively young age. You can't tell it based on our beard length, but I'm the Jew. Some depends who you ask. But so it's a text, right? There's a text to it. But there's also a tradition that goes along with the text, and how you choose which texts you're going to be reading is about as much as your own story and your own tradition as it is the actual written word. So for me, I hold to what Gordon used to, the statement of faith at Gordon, the 66 canonical books is the only infallible guide.
The inspired word of God.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sure. However, I also celebrate Hanukkah, and because Jesus did in John chapter 10, and so Maccabees also has a special place for me in my life. I am sensitive to the deuterocanonical, the apocryphal texts that our Catholic and Orthodox and Coptic brothers and sisters read, because I know the story, the tradition of the 70 elders translating the Hebrew Bible into Greek, and all of a sudden it becomes 72 elders, and that's a part of the story. That's a part of the tradition. And it's that tradition, story, text combination that when I read Jesus saying, Moses, the prophets, and the writings speak of me, he's talking about that text and that tradition, and he's continuing on that in the New Testament. And so I read all of those things, plus I read the New Testament, and I hold the conversation that the Church Universal is having in tension with everything else that's going on, because it's all part of what the Bible is. You start with the text, but you don't end with the text, but you go back to the text. and sort of let the text guide you and inform you and bring you into the story that it is, because it's a story of God's people, and if by faith we are God's people, then it's our story. How's that?
So there's a lot in there to pick up on. I'm gonna start with some of the things, Abe, that you brought out. We'll come back to you, Malcolm. You begin out by saying it's a text and a tradition. Now,
it's a very Catholic answer.
Yeah. So this is what I want to unpack, because there's lots of people who are going to hear that and they're going to say, "Wait a minute, I thought it's just weird." It's what the fancy way of saying it is sola scriptura, right? The Bible alone. The Bible says it. All I need is the Bible. The Bible, Jesus, and me. It's all I really need. And yet you were saying something different. So how would you respond to someone who asks you about that? What do you mean, a tradition? I thought we were supposed to leave behind traditions of men. Doesn't Jesus say that? So what's that about?
No, actually, I think Jesus says, "I won't abolish any bit of the law." And as much as I believe in sola scriptura, I believe in sola fide, I believe in the tenets of the Reformation. I am not only reformed, but I am reformed. Calvinists might disagree with me, but anyway, but I hold to those things. But the text doesn't actually say that, and so you have to embrace. And of course, Martin Luther didn't like some books of the Bible that I think are canonical. Other people, he didn't like Hebrews and Revelation and
James,
all the Jewish ones. So, and I think Jesus, because I have a personal relationship with Jesus. Jesus points to a text that is a tradition, because you have the Torah, which the Sadducees hold to, but you then have the writings and the prophets that the Pharisees hold to, that Jesus holds to because he's in the Pharisaic tradition. And because I follow Jesus, I follow his tradition and his text, which is the entirety of the Hebrew Bible, of the Old Testament.
So if I can try to reinterpret what you're saying, tell me if this is accurate. You're saying, in a sense, that the text itself is a tradition.
And if, as a Christian, I believe since I'm following Jesus, I'm embracing his tradition.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people would agree with that. But the idea of the text is a tradition, that I think for a lot of people, that's going to be a mind blower. So unpack that a little for us. What does that actually mean to a person to whom that's a new concept, right? How would you unpack that for them?
Can I take
Sure,
it?
absolutely.
So can you hear me that right there? So like when we talk about our Bibles, right? Like we talk about my Bible, right? And so this is my Bible, right? That my folks gave to me when I was 14 and I was just new to going to Bible study, and they were like, "Well, you need something better than the picture Bible that you got when you were in first grade." So
I still use one of those.
Mine's still somewhere. I think it's at my parents' house. But
is that a Ryrie study Bible?
No, it's the NIV. It's the NIV study Bible.
Right.
That's the best one to get. You can get them at Ollie's for $20 right now. When we were in Bible classes together, the professor would say something, and if you look down at the study notes in that Bible, it was what the professor had just said. Now, it may be because he wrote those study notes, but it's worthwhile. You can save yourself $200,000 of theological education by buying one of these. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted as I often do.
There's no problem. I've gotten used to it at this point, but I think one of the things that was interesting to me of what Abe was talking about that I think is so important to this is we talk about like our Bibles. And that's sort of a misnomer, and yet it's also sort of correct, right? And so one of the things that in the world that we live in is we want to see like how these things will like become a part of my story, right? Like, have you seen that on Facebook? Like you've got my story at Facebook.
Right.
I never watch those things because I'm an old man in many ways. But it's so very me-centered. And one of the things about the Bible and that tradition piece of it is that it invites you into this thing that is not that can't simply be made apart. You can't enforce yourself upon it, right? And and I think that's the mistake that we can make when we say, like, well, my Bible says this and my Bible says, it's like, no, hang on a second, because the tradition piece of it is like, how does that inform who I am? And so then it does sort of then lead us back to saying, okay, now this really has become something of mine, but it's in a different way. It's not like I have the authority over it. It's now this story, this tradition informs me. And now that is the thing that I have become a part of.
Because the text actually says each generation should consider themselves to have been brought out, that this is what the Lord has done for me, which I think when Paul is talking about being ingrafted into the shrub, the olive tree, that is Israel, is being ingrafted into that story. But what that means is, in the same way that he says that Gentiles can't boast over Jews, the person today can't boast over the people who have gone before, that there's a history that you are coming into, but there's also a piece that will come after you, that it is not, that your experience is not the sum total of what God is doing. It's a continuation of, and it will eventually be supporting somebody else's experience with the text and with God.
Mm. And you're talking about Romans 9-11 in that little, what you were referring to there.
The engrafted part.
Yeah, I don't remember the numbers because they weren't in the original, so I never.
Right. So here's the thing: I hear you guys talking about this, and you're talking about tradition as if it's a good thing, as if it's okay. But there's a lot of people that are really fearful of what they label the traditions of men, right? That's the phrase that people get hung up on, right? But you're talking about traditions
of women.
Sure. But you're talking about it as if it's a good thing. So how does that work?
Can I quote Marv?
Cool. Yeah.
So our mentor said that tradition should be the living faith of the dead, not the dead faith of the living. Pretty good.
Okay. I just had to process that. Yeah. All right. Anything more to say on that score?
Is tradition a good thing, right? Like, that was your question. Like, what do you say to the person who wants to say that?
I know what Tevye would say.
Because it's
by all means,
tradition is what as in Fiddler, right? Tradition is what sustains you, and when you don't, and of course, Fiddler's a great example of. You need the tradition to keep doing what you're going to do when you don't know what else to do. But sometimes you encounter something new, and you have to find something in the tradition that supports this new thing.
There's a pattern right now, Dave, to taking apart tradition and taking apart the underpinnings and the structure of many things in our society, because there are faults within them. Well, I mean, to that, I guess I would say our tradition of the Bible, of faith in God, affirms that our human systems are flawed at best. Although the best that we can hope for is that we can have God within those systems. And so it's a valid thing, and it's an honest thing to look at our traditions and say, where did we go wrong? And what can we do better? Which I think fits in with what Abe was saying.
Or also, what did we do right? And what needs to be preserved?
And that's the other side to it, is that the person who wants to throw out all tradition, I would say, have you honestly looked at it and said it all needs to be thrown out? Does that one little piece mean that all of it is worthless, right? And if you agree to that, then you have to ask the same question about yourself and say, okay, have you ever done anything? And if that one little piece is enough to throw out the whole thing, then what does that mean for your whole life?
Beware the yeast of the Pharisees. Anyway.
So I mean, kind of implicit in what you're saying is that there's always a tradition through which we're reading the text. Like,
we haven't even talked about translation issues, right? Translation is an interpretation, is a tradition.
Right. And the Bible has always been translated. Like, the words of Jesus were delivered in Aramaic to his disciples, who then translated into Greek. So the text is even a translation and therefore an interpretation, right?
Unless you think Matthew was originally written in Hebrew, like some people do, but that's
some people do. Well, see, interesting. So yeah, so I think that may be a new pathway for people to explore the fact that the text is actually a tradition. So let's bring that a little bit sharper. You talked about, what books. You didn't use those terms, but you talked about reading the Bible that Jesus wrote, which includes many scrolls that we don't. Well,
the
many
Bible
scrolls
that
that many. Sure. That includes many scrolls that many Protestants don't pay a lot of attention to today. So talk about that. How, because when we talk about what is the Bible, there's a lot of people reading this who say, well, it's 66 books, right? It's these books. But you're saying that there's maybe other scrolls that are included in that collection. Talk about that a little bit.
I would say if you read those 66 books, that the text, those 66 books indicate a support for those other texts, particularly John chapter 10. Here I am going to quote it because I've got it memorized. When Jesus goes up to Jerusalem to celebrate the feast of dedication, is how the NIV translates it. But if you look at the footnote, it's Hanukkah. All right, well then we need to know about Hanukkah. In Jude, when it's talking about the assumption or testament of Moses, or what exactly is going on there, there's a little scholarly debate to be had about that. That indicates some support for some rabbinic writings that normally even our Catholic brothers and sisters, or people who read the Apocrypha, overlook. I think it's important. That's why that whole piece about it's a tradition is looking at those texts, how they were produced, how they were involved, or how they came to be, involves more than just them. And I would argue that Jesus, is embracing a progression of texts from the Torah and the Psalms and wisdom literature and the prophets, which the prophets and the Psalms are critical of and reforming of the Torah, of the all the rules around the temple and the sacrificial system and things, which is part of the work that Jesus is doing in the New Testament, is continuing that rabbinic pattern of, okay, where do we draw the lines? What's important? How do we really follow God? Is it the letter of the law, or is it the spirit of the law? Is it is it just for the people who were brought out, the physical descendants of the people who were brought out of Egypt, or is it for all the nations, the way that the prophets talk about it?
When you say reforming, do you mean like the pieces in like the Psalms and the prophets where it says the sacrifices that I have asked for are a broken spirit, a contrite heart, and he has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require?
It's not the blood of bulls that I desire. Right. And if you're reading that, you get to that point, and you're sort of like, wait a second. If you're doing your four chapters a day, right? You get to Psalms, you're like, wait a second. Back here, you said this is what I want you to do as an everlasting, ordinance. Well, wait a second. Now you think Valentine's Day is hard for married guys. Trying to follow the Lord's will is a difficult thing as you're reading the Bible, because the most famous one is in Proverbs, right? Two verses later, the next verse, rebuke a fool and then don't rebuke a fool. Well, which is it? Both.
I just asked the question because, like, the idea of like the later books of the First Testament, of the Hebrew Testament, might be reforming the earlier writings, might be like kind of a shock to people that might not have considered it that way.
So. Well, and certainly, I mean, there's a reason why the Sadducees don't read those books, because they're critical of the establishment. It would weaken the drive for people to bring their offerings and sacrifices to the temple, which then weakens the Sadducees' political power, because they have less money, they have less goods to kick back to the Romans. It's a whole, the text is a tradition, is a behavior, is a pattern of life, but this is a very Pharisaic, rabbinic approach. The way that you live your life, the way of walking, the way that Christianity becomes, that's an approach to the text that is, uniquely. Here, I will use the adjective Judeo-Christian.
Yeah. Actually, that's a great segue into our next big question, and it picks up on something that Malcolm mentioned in your kind of testimony about what the Bible has meant to you. You talked about it as the rule of life. Now, I know between the three of us, that's a phrase that we've batted around a whole lot. So here's the next question. Why should we read the Bible? So the Bible is all these different things. It's a text. We could, we didn't even talk about what the text talks about, like what's the main subject of it, right? It's a text and it's a tradition. All right. So why should we bother with it today? Because we talk about the time of Jesus and before. It's a very old thing. What does that have to do with us today?
So picking up where Abe left off with the text, the 66 books, right, canonical that we have, like there's a starting point, right? There's more around that, and as Abe said, when you read closely the text as we have it in our Bibles, then you can begin to see that there's more going on here than just there, because everything has a setting, right? Sits in Laban?
Yeah.
Right. That's the word. So everything has this setting that it's in, this context that it's in. So for me, the why read it, right? So it's the story that I'm entering into in this way. And so in that sense, the 66 books become that beginning place, right? And they're certainly like the focal place that the history of our faith has said, okay, these are the ones, right? Like these are the ones that we recognize as being the most important. And so why read it? For me, the answer is sort of part of that story, because when I first started really reading it in earnest was at a Bible study, was at a youth group Bible study. And so I was like 14, I think, maybe 15. I wasn't driving yet because I know I had to get picked up and dropped off, not in that order. And so it became like, okay, if this faith of mine that is mine is going to mean something to me, how am I going to think about that faith? What is it going to mean to me? How is that faith going to inform my life? And what is that relationship that faith implies, that faith is founded upon? What do I know about that? Because otherwise I'm just deaf, dumb, and stupid is no way to go through the world, right? And so I need to read this thing. I need to understand it. And I was blessed enough to have some very good leaders, some mentors who have now become good friends, be able to go over it, even verse by verse, and say, what does this mean, and how does it impact our lives? And that was the key to it. The key to it was what does this mean for the way we live our lives, which is really inherent to the rule of life concept. And that's something that I'm sort of new to understanding, that using that phrase in that way, but it's something that I've sort of applied in my understanding of the Bible. Why read it? Because if I'm going to say this is a true thing in my life, this faith that I have, then I've got to have some sort of understanding of it. I've got to have some sort of way of putting it into action in my life. And if I'm just going to be out there, flailing around without any guidance or direction, then I'm lost, and I'm quickly going to end up in some place that I probably shouldn't, and thinking something that I probably shouldn't. So there is a piece to it that is also within the bounds of right thinking, of orthodoxy, as we might say.
So I believe that all truth is God's truth. And normally when people say that, what they mean is, oh, there's this this understanding, this thing that is outside of the faith or the tradition or the Bible, or that this thing is true, and so we have to embrace it. Now, I believe that. But I also believe that the Bible is God's truth, and so therefore it behooves me to know it and to understand it, and that it has intrinsic value because it's true. Now, how it's true is I know I don't have time for that today, but that process of engaging it and embracing it, because although there are all sorts of things that are different about our existence today, cell phones and computers and lights and running water and germ theory, right? There's a all truth is God's truth thing. Fundamentally, our human existence is unchanged over the past 4,000 years or 10,000 years, if you want to go for that for human history. There is a universality to the biblical truth because it speaks to the human condition as well as it speaks to the human story. Because it's a story that covers 2,000 years or so from. If you want to go for hard dates from Abraham to Jesus, that's a good solid 2,000 years. And I'm going to skip over some of the questionable things. In 2,000 years, people didn't change. Time and time again, the people of God returned to this text, this story, and found value and importance and truth for their lives. They found salvation when they were being carried off into slavery. They found peace when there was war. They found meaning when there was meaninglessness. And so you and I and everybody we meet, whether they know it or not, fits in the Bible, and the Bible can speak to their condition, their understanding, their struggles, their joys, all of that, all that is life, because life is true and the Bible is truth, and so therefore it is that's why you should read it.
But why the Bible?
Why not some other book?
Yeah, why not some other book? There's lots of books that claim to have truth about how we should live, and right from the nosebleed philosophies who are way up here to to much more simple personal development and goal setting, and right even finding the purpose of your life and books like that. Why? Which are much easier to read today, right? They're outlined and they're logical. Well, some of them are, and they're right. Why the Bible?
So read, if you shop online, right, and you're trying to figure out which one's the best, look at the reviews. The Bible has the longest track record. There are other texts that are older. But ask any Babylonians about Enuma Elish and how that forms their life today. Oh, you can't find any. Ask any Egyptians about the tradition of Ra and then the creation of the world and its moral teaching. Can't find any of those today. There are some newer ones that people think are really snazzy. But the Bible is the oldest, longest standing, most thumbs up 4 or 5-star reviews, most lives changed across, again, again, I will use the adjective Judeo-Christian tradition has impacted the world more than any other book, hands down, full stop. And so the Bible, even if if you don't believe in God the way that we do, the Bible has had more impact on the English language, has had more impact on history, has had more impact on social justice campaigns, any sort of liberation of humanity, any sort of improvement in terms of scientific theory or the Enlightenment or democracy. Anything that you like about humanity has its roots in an interaction with the Bible.
Malcolm, want to add to that?
I do.
Yeah. That's a pretty good one, by the way. So let me, while Malcolm's gathering his thoughts, let me just pile on with you, Abe.
It's like,
I know that when I do some shopping on Amazon and I look at the reviews and I see 4.5 stars, I then also look at how many reviews. And if there's 5 reviews at 4.5 stars, I'm like, eh. But if they see 4.5 stars and it's 2,000 reviews, that's like, okay, that one right there, right? Yeah.
Particularly if one embraces the idea that Islam has been influenced by the Christian Bible, the Jewish Bible, which was then influenced by the Jewish Bible, right? I think the world numbers are somewhere like 3 billion people. That's a lot of thumbs ups.
A lot of thumbs ups. Okay, Malcolm.
Okay. How do I want to put I didn't use my time well, Dave.
I was so mesmerized by wow, I hadn't thought about it. That sounds crazy.
Well, because the point that you're making is incredibly valid, Abe. And so I had an English teacher, an AP English teacher who made a counter argument which stuck with me and is kind of true, but is also kind of not true. He said, well, a lot of people became Nazis, but that doesn't mean that the Nazis were right. Now, that's not your point.
Actually, that's in the text, right? The 10 people who don't want to go into the land and the 2 who do. We know that majority doesn't rule.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of testimonials for changed lives and changed societies based on the Bible.
And that's what I would come to. It's not so much an argument of weight in the numbers, right? Like the numbers of people, but it's weight in the truth of the message, the weight in the truth of the story. And to that, I think the question of why read the Bible is because it's God's story, because it's the story of God interacting with his people, with creation, and then from all of that come all the things that I think Abe was talking about, which is all the impacts that it has had on the story of human history, right?
Yeah.
So why read the Bible? Because within the pages we find God, because within those pages we understand who we are and who God is. If you have any inclination towards either of those questions, if you have any truthful investigation into the deeper questions in those anthropological questions, right? What are they? We need to know why we're here, what we're meant to do, those things. They're found within the Bible. And if you want to go and look somewhere else, sure, that's fine, right? I'll support your endeavors. I mean, at least to some point in a truthful investigation. But I will maintain that time and time again, the Bible will stand up to that investigation and will prove to be worthwhile in and of itself, not simply because of the weight of the numbers behind it, but because of the weight of the being that is within it.
Well, and I would cite that as well with because sometimes people say, well, what about the other books that didn't get in, right? What about the Gospel of Thomas? What about the Gospel of Jesus? What about the Gospel of Mary? And I'd say, well, let's take a look at those. Let's read them. And what you see is that those are all significantly flawed, at least from my standpoint, for basing your life on. I don't want to say that some of humanity is a second-class citizen because they were born a particular sex, the way that the Gospel of Thomas does, because it's Gnostic. It doesn't connect. It doesn't speak to me in the same way that when I read the canonical Gospels speaks to the Jesus that I have encountered and has changed my life. Again, we get back to that relationship tradition piece of the text. So, if somebody says, well, I want to base my life on Star Wars, and there's plenty of people who do, right? Oh, okay, let's see how that does in 4,000 years, right? I suspect that it won't have quite the longevity. It might work for a little while, but what were everybody doing before those, things come out? And do you count the prequels or do you count the, where's your canon? What are you drawing? And how does that work when your mother's dying of cancer?
It's super.
How does that work when you encounter incredible sexual violence in society?
Mm.
How does that work to address systemic racism? Those things have all been addressed by the Bible and traditions based on the Bible. Star Wars is fun and exciting and swing, but no, it's a thin gruel for basing your life on.
Star Wars also very much stole from the Bible. So there's an irony there. There's something important about this father-son relationship,
and the whole virgin birth thing. Like, where did they get that idea? Yeah.
Nice. So, which brings us to the third question. It's a great, actually, segue into that. So, the Bible's important for a lot of different reasons we've just talked about, but I think we still agree that it's a very old. It's not the normal kind of book that people go to today. It's very different from the ordinary book you would find. It's long. It's complex. It feels to the uninitiated very disjointed. The language is odd. Even in the more modern translations, the language still is odd. The stories are strange. Some of the events are positively hair-raising if you have hair. So in that, with all those things in mind, how should we go about reading it to actually make sense out of it and get some of the value out of it that you have seemed to be able to find? How do we read it?
In community.
Talk about that. That's a nice phrase. What does it mean? How does it work?
So just as I said, you know, we talk about our Bibles and we talk about my Bible, right? And our story and everything, right? You're not the authority on all things in your life. And you need other people within your life who you are patterning your life after, who are helping you to examine your life, who you are helping them to examine their life. And so the Bible being read in community, it doesn't just mean like go to a Bible study. It means if you're going to read it as a piece of a rule of life for you, as informative to a relationship that you now have with God or that you want to have with God, then that will be lived out. That will be lived out in some way, whether or not you want it to, or whether or not you think that that's what it should happen, you will live it out. It's just the reality of the situation, how you work. And so that means that this book that comes from a community, that comes from multiple human authors and multiple periods of time, has always been read in community. It's always,
usually out loud.
Yeah. And so if you're going to read the Bible, how should you read the Bible? In community with other people who are honestly examining the Bible and honestly accepting it as some sort of rule of life for themselves.
And I think that community is also important to say that it needs to be not only the community who reads the Bible the way that you do, but also in community with people who read the Bible and come to different interpretations and different understandings, because that also speaks to, oh, I'm not in charge of figuring everything out, and somebody else may have something. Now, they may be wrong. I mean, there's plenty of people who read the Bible that are wrong about their interpretations. We Baptists have a terrible history of the lone person reading the scriptures and coming to a new understanding, and oh my goodness, and going off the deep end. We should read it by ourselves, but we also have to, even hermits, right? The monks who live off by themselves, and it's just them and Satan, duking it out like Jesus in the wilderness. They're still in a community of a monastery. They still touch base sometimes and say, hey, this is what's going on with me. And so you and I, we cannot be solo Christians. There are no lone wolf Christians. Well, there are plenty of them, but they aren't really lone wolf, and they're getting to bad places. You need to be doing it in community, and your community needs to include the people who agree with you, but also has to include the people who disagree with you, and has to include people who disagree with both of you. we call them the Orthodox. That there's all sorts of community that, and this is one of the things that we see in Vatican II is that our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters recognized, oh, we've been acting like we're the only game in town, but there are these other churches and ecclesial communities that have to be thought of, and we have to relate to them. The other thing is in terms of how, so in community and on your own, letting the Lord speak to you, and frequently and in total, that you need to read the whole of the Bible. You can't just have the one verse a day, because as my daughter pointed out, they always quote the same 365 verses, and there's lots in the Bible that aren't necessarily like highlights that, oh, I need this for every day, but there are dark nights of the soul when you do need to know those scriptures. When the Harvey Weinstein thing broke, and I was preaching from Esther because it's addressing and telling the story of men in power using that power to exploit women who aren't in power. And to see, oh, what's happening now has happened before, and this is how God has used it and worked through it, and people have survived, and it's not the end of the story. Again, it's those tough times when things aren't going well, when we encounter sin and evil and death in our lives or in the world, or we just hear about it and begin to think about it, and it puts us in a funk. It's those dark times that the Bible shines light. I think it actually says that. And so it's important to read the whole Bible, even though sometimes we may read something and go, I'm not sure that what this does for me or how it speaks to me. Maybe it doesn't, but eventually it will.
So let me see if I get exactly what you're saying here. Let me bring it really down to the point. If you're, let's say, a Calvinist, this means you should actually be reading the works of Arminius and Wesley. And what
I'm not sure about Arminius; he was a heretic, but certainly Wesley.
Yeah. Okay. I'm making sure I got the right arm guy. Anyhow, and if you're a Presbyterian, you should be listening to the Methodists, and if you're a Baptist, you should be listening to what the Roman Catholic Church has to say. Everybody should be listening to the Orthodox, right? Right. And we should be listening to what the Jews say about their interpretation of the law and the prophets, right? And we should that's very countercultural today. So how do you help people to do that? What do they do when they hear something that's not like it's been ever explained before, and it doesn't seem right to them? How do you do that?
It's a Matthew McConaughey moment, right? Like, hey, I'm going to blow your mind. like, think about this now.
I would hope that in all those conversations, and you can read Arminius if you want, even though he's a heretic, go back to the text. And so you read it and you hear what other people, because your interpretation of what the text means isn't in the text. And so you're always going back to the text because the text is where the truth is. And yes, you have to interpret it and apply it and extract it. But we also know from history that plenty of people have misread the text. And again, this would go to my only certain things. Right, the slaveholders are Baptists, slaveholding Baptists in the South used to love to preach the Bible to their slaves, but they could only pick about 4 or 5 verses. Slaves, submit to your masters. There was a whole bunch that they had to skip over because fundamentally God is about liberating people and freeing people and valuing people, not $ valuing. I can have a bill of sale for you valuing, but you are the image of God. But it's important to read, all of those things, because sometimes people get things wrong, and so to have that humility to let the text be the text and see what it actually says, and let that speak to you. And sometimes you have to listen to other people who are saying, hey, this isn't what this word means. Yeah, it's a challenge.
So the whole piece of the Bible, right? Like reading the whole of it. That's sort of what I'm hearing Abe say, in that's a really key piece of it, because when you begin to pull just certain verses out, that's when you begin to use those certain verses to prop up your own confirmation bias, right? So if you're going to ask, help somebody, then there is a little bit of like self understanding that you have to have. You have to have a little bit of self understanding about how we think in some ways, or at least give some consideration to them. There was an article, I think, I know that Timothy Keller wrote it. I think it was in the New York Times. I think it was an opinion piece. It was a couple of years back. And he was talking about sort of this type of thing. And so he's at Redeemer Presbyterian in New York, right? So he comes from, he comes from a good Scottish tradition. And so
for those of you who don't know, Malcolm is a Calvinist, and I am right.
So coming from a good and Keller's a name that's like well known enough, so you can go and look up this article that he wrote, right? And he said that he had a friend who was a good Orthodox Presbyterian, but who was also a good right-winged conservative American, right? And fully believed in so many of the tenets of our American governmental system, and good for him, right? And he got this person got the opportunity to go to Scotland, and I'm paraphrasing here, so please look at the article up. Don't take my word for it. Read it yourself. And so this person got the opportunity to go to Scotland and was so excited, because like here's the the place of our Presbyterian faith and tradition and everything, and gets to Scotland, and I can identify with that.
Can you see the bagpipes in the background? I don't think you can, but they're there.
Do you need a theme song, Dave?
Keep going.
And so this person gets to Scotland and is so excited, and finds a group of Orthodox Presbyterians that are really like, they have a faith that is real and true and is on fire, and he's just so overjoyed, and then finds out that they're communists. And is just shattered because wait a minute, you read your Bible and came to a different conclusion than when I read my Bible, and we agree about this, but we drastically disagree about this other thing. What does that mean? And so many times I think, the places where we're holding on to things are probably because maybe we're holding a little bit too closely to some human institution in some ways. And, those are always flawed at best. I was always taught that Roger Williams was a heretic and was a terrible person, because growing up in Massachusetts and growing up in a congregational church, we good Puritans, we kicked that heretic right out and we sent him to Rhode Island. My wife, who grew up in Rhode Island and grew up in a conservative Baptist church, was taught that Roger Williams was a hero of the faith.
And she was right.
I'm in the awkward position of having a wife.
I'll cut that part out. That's really good. Presumably, this gentleman that Tim Keller was writing about, and these people that he met in Scotland, there were divergences, but there were also things that they shared, and they were able to continue to share them. Is that how the article goes, or did that cause them to go back to America, feeling like it was a wasted trip?
Well, Keller was trying to make a very good point, which is very appropriate, and is still very appropriate for our time today, which is that it's not good when we take our Bible, our tradition of understanding the Bible, and only apply it in that one little context, and say that it's only true here, right? And so he was trying to make the argument that as Christians, we need to not just be conservative or or liberal in our political leanings. We need to understand how it is that the Bible crosses these things. That, like Abe was saying, that
I
this
see what
truth
you did there. Crosses these things.
that this truth is a universal truth to the human situation, and so the Bible speaks to those things. And so as Christians, and I'll fully admit here, I've never belonged to a political party, and I don't, call that a point of pride or whatever you want, but it's like, I don't want to belong to anybody but Jesus.
Nice. That's really good stuff. Hey, we're at the 52-minute mark, which is probably a good place to wrap it up. Any final thoughts on what the Bible is, why we should read it, how we should read it?
More. We should read it more.
More.
I have this fun experience sometimes when I ask one of my people on my praise team in church, I say, hey, why don't you read this psalm like in between the two songs, because that's something that we're supposed to do now, right? If we're doing contemporary worship. We don't have a fog machine or lighting or anything.
Or skinny
like
jeans.
No. And we don't have pallets behind us or anything like that. There's an organ behind us, actually.
A lot of inside jokes there, but yeah.
When it's some people will understand them, and that's enough.
Yeah.
Or just me, and that's enough too.
Us. He who amuses himself will never cease to be entertained, or something like that.
I'm the funniest guy I know. Anyways, but sometimes somebody will say to me, like, boy, this is a long psalm.
We are the Statler and Waldorf of Vermont Baptist. Anyway.
I've seen detergents that leave a better film than this. My point in saying all of this is that every once in a while someone would be like, wow, that's a really long scripture. Should we read all of that? Well, what might happen? What dangerous thing might happen if we read it?
You might go over the 59 minutes you're supposed to worship the Lord your God one day a week at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, right? It's not in the text, folks. You can always send them to my church.
Oh,
I mean, I read a full psalm and a full chapter of scripture every week. And sometimes I read it twice because I want to point something out that.
And I'm not trying to pick on my people.
We love them
in my church. Absolutely, we love them. I love them,
and hopefully they love us.
But as a pastor, right? Like, my job is to say, this is important. Open it up, read it, figure it out, understand it, apply it, live it out. And so, yeah, more of it. Absolutely.
Excellent. Hey, thanks for taking the time to be with us on Bible Chat.
Thank you for having us,
Dave.
Dave.
Really appreciate it. God bless you all, and may he spur us on to read more of his word.
Absolutely.
Amen.